My guest at this time is Alon Berman. He's the vice president at the American Foreign Policy Council. We want to get his insights into the latest developments in Israeli politics, as Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is charged with a number of corruption-related offenses. The news also comes as Israel remains in a political stalemate weeks after election results left Benny Gantz and Benjamin Netanyahu in a dead heat, and neither of them have been able to form a coalition unity government. So what does all of this mean, and what will happen next? Alon, thanks so much for being with us.
Oh, great to be back.
The charges were announced by the Attorney General that Netanyahu actually chose for the post. The charges are bribery, fraud, and breach of trust. And from what I've seen, the allegations essentially suggest that Netanyahu wrongly accepted gifts from business tycoons and also did regulatory favors for two media outlets, which returned the favor with unfavorable stories. So what else should our listeners know about the allegations here?
No, I think in the broad contours, that's exactly right. These are charges that have been percolating for some time. There's three separate legal cases against him. One has to do with essentially political favoritism that advantaged one of Netanyahu's donors, and the other two have to do with this sort of favor sharing with news outlets where Netanyahu tried to game the news cycle in order to get favorable coverage for himself and depress unfavorable coverage among Israel's notoriously independent newspapers.
He says it's all political. Does he have a case to make with that argument? What do we know for sure here?
Well, listen, I think, at the end of the day, the principle that familiarity breeds contempt is exactly right. Bibi is now the longest-serving Israeli prime minister, longest-serving Israeli head of state, and he has done a tremendous amount for the country in economic and political terms and really stabilized Israel's position on a political level and also as a global economic power. But precisely because he has, more and more people are saying, the country's well off. We're looking at these irregularities that have taken place during his rule. And, we're in a stable enough position that we can really sort of push back against them. And, Bibi seems more and more to be an assailable figure, a corrupt figure, and somebody that needs to come clean.
Ilan, is Bibi a little bit like President Trump in that by now everyone pretty much has an opinion of him, and regardless of what else happens from here on out, it's probably not going to change too many minds?
So I think that's probably right. And the last time I was in Israel a couple of months ago, that was precisely the vibe that I got. Supporters of Netanyahu from the Likud party were convinced that these cases were essentially trumped-up political games that his opponents were playing, and opponents of Netanyahu believe that there was at least some there, and he and his family and his close political compatriots really needed to face the music as part of a rule of law process.
Now, while we have the standoff, since he was the incumbent prime minister, he remains prime minister until it gets resolved one way or the other. But what's the immediate political impact of him now essentially being indicted?
Right. Well, so all of this comes amid this period of really remarkable political uncertainty in Israel. We are now in sort of at the tail end of the second election. We had electoral results that allowed Bibi's Likud party to get first crack at forming a governing coalition. They couldn't do that. The what's called the mandate then shifted over to the runner-up, the center-left Benny Gantz and his blue and white coalition. And Benny Gantz couldn't form a coalition either. And so now the mandate has gone to the Israeli parliament, which is known as the Knesset, and they have something like 18 days left to try to form a government. And if they can't, then the country goes into a third round of elections, a third round in less than a year. And this is enormously politically disruptive in Israel. But it's also now a completely open question because now that Bibi is under this legal cloud, it's not clear whether he's going to remain the sort of the president of the Likud party, whether he's really going to be even a significant political contender in the election, right? So all of a sudden, through these indictments, the entire Israeli political landscape has shifted pretty significantly.
If I remember correctly, there's 120 seats in the Knesset, so you need 61, I guess, to have a majority. And both Netanyahu and Gantz, somewhere in the low to mid-30s, right? So they needed a lot of help from other smaller parties to get to that point. And the one who was supposed to be kingmaker, I believe, was Avigdor Lieberman, but he decided not to help either one of them. So even if there is another election, is anybody going to get to 61?
Well, right. And so that's the question. So up until today, I think the answer was that if the election was run for a third time in the immediate future, that the outcome will be exactly the same as it was the last couple of times, where you had Likud with 33, 34, blue and white with roughly the same number of votes, and neither one with enough political partners to cross over that 61-seat threshold and really build a stable government. But now you have a really different situation, which is that in Likud, where Bibi has been sort of the political kingmaker, the force to be reckoned with for over a decade, you now have potentially a political shakeup where the party may choose to demote him, they may choose to sideline him, or they may choose to back him. But if Bibi moves away politically, is sidelined politically, it actually raises the chances that there might be some sort of coalition government, right? Because he's a uniquely polarizing figure, and if he's not in the picture, or at least not in as large a position in the picture, it may be possible to hammer out that coalition after all.
Ilan, as long as this stalemate goes on, as I mentioned before, Netanyahu remains prime minister. But given the fact that he can't form a unity government, is he seen as a weaker figure? Based on his own actions, it doesn't look that way, since I believe I saw headlines just a couple of days ago about Israel striking Iranian elements inside Syria. So what's the vibe on that? Is he as powerful as he ever was at the moment, or does the fact that he can't put together a government anymore somehow, at least politically, weaken him even while he remains in office?
Right. Well, I think over his 12 or so years in the leadership of the Jewish state, he's amassed a tremendous amount of political capital. And it's political capital that he's managed to harness even when he's effectively a lame duck, even when he's this sort of the head of this caretaker government that's limping along until some sort of resolution is hammered out. He has always sort of leaned on his forte, which is Israeli security and foreign policy, which involves sort of a forward-leaning interpretation of what Israel needs to do in places like Syria and places like Lebanon and the Palestinian territories. I think that's really not changing. The real question is whether or not he's really going to retain that freedom of action now that he's under this legal cloud, now that he's dealing with all these judicial troubles at home. It's not clear that he's going to be as powerful, that he's going to be as unfettered as he has been up until now.
Ilan, as always, great to have you with us. Thanks for your time today. We appreciate it.
Oh, my pleasure. Thanks.
Ilan Berman, Vice President of the American Foreign Policy Council. I'm Greg Corombos reporting for Radio America.